There are Georgian houses all over Britain, but these are peculiar in that they have gone from quite a period of affluence to great poverty rather quickly, rather like shipwrecks. And when we buy the houses, the excitement of opening a closet and finding periwig pegs still on the wall, and the exciting things under floorboards, it is the antiquity, more than anything, that we come for. The point of the house is, simply, that it is the only house in Britain that's lived in, maintained, decorated, heated, cleaned, everything as it was in the 18th and 19th centuries. And my job isn't to hoard any of the past in furniture or porcelain. My job is living the past. And it has a very positive reward, in that I live here with a fictitious family called the Jarvises. There are 4 generations of them. They're not spectacular people, they're middle-class people, silk weavers, Huguenots. And they conform completely to the spirit of their age. The footman works for them, and I live in proxy for them. And everything I do, from the time I get up in the morning to a quick use of the chamber pot at midnight, all is done for them. And how that affects the outside world is that I will, say, give a bachelor assembly. All the neighbors come in, we sit here at this table, and we reproduce at this table that scene. Everything in that picture is in the room somewhere. The punch bowl, the glasses, the clock, they're in the same position. I might rearrange it slightly, but it's there. And you can smell it, and you can see it. When people come in from the outside, they are going to completely have their ears, their minds, their eyes completely jammed with the Jarvises. They could be potential dynamite.
Mr. Ricardo Shinani.
Hi, you got out of the studio. Hi. Very good. Ricardo.
Mr. Daniel Cruickshank.
Hi, Dan.
See you, Dennis.
Is Vicky here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, very good. Can I put you here?
Yes, lovely.
Good. Let's see. Let's put you here, Ricardo. Inside me. You feel completely free here. There's nobody picking on your shoulder and saying, would you mind moving your car up? Or, we really don't think much of your curtains. We're completely free in that way. More and more, it comes apparent that people are truly passionate about their houses, and they love more than anything the antiquity. Excellent.
Think of
that. Wonderful. What makes Spitalfields special to me, though, is the sense of community. Everybody's up to something. They're all doing something. They are, in a way, peculiar, but it's a land for the peculiar. I mean, we're not going to offend anyone by being ourselves.
Dan, I know, would love to shoot me for the rack lighting in the library at home, but it's always struck me that a library in which you can't see to read is rather a pointless room.
These houses were not built, you see, as weavers' houses. They were adapted. I think of it, and I think most people think of it, as a sort of new frontier. There's something very strange about it, and very eerie sometimes. But that is what makes it so special. And I think that the houses appeal to characters.
Well, yes, because somebody needs to take that in hand.
1710 Terrace, that one?
Yes.
1710.
Now,
Right.
to you all. Edward Jarvis and you all.
The people who live in these houses are genuinely interested in them and in their history and in the history of this part of London. Waves of people coming in from abroad and being accommodated, sometimes happily, sometimes not so happily, but at least here it is, and they've come here and they've settled, and they've all contributed something to the area.
There is this sort of fixation in people's minds about the 18th century and the silk weavers. There's something rather exotic and romantic about it. Birds singing in cages, which was a great Spitalfields thing, of course. The weavers loved their canaries.
Many of the silk weavers were Huguenot refugees. And thanks to their skills, which they brought with them, Spitalfields became famous for its silk. The Jewish community started building up in the Georgian period. This area, Spitalfields, was already a fairly heavily concentrated, or had a fairly heavily concentrated Jewish community as early as the 1850s and 1860s. But the great waves of immigration came in the 1880s. The population here went up probably 10 or 12-fold. Spitalfields itself is such a unique area. It is the only area, as far as I'm aware, in the whole of this country, which has had 4 of the 5 waves of immigrants into the country. Those who came in the 1880s were in the main from Eastern Europe, from Tsarist Russia, from Russo-Poland, Hungary, but most of them came from Tsarist Russia. This is probably one of the most densely Jewish populated areas of the whole of the East End. In fact, many of the streets here as early as the 1860s and 1870s were 75 to 100% Jewish, and as late as the 1930s, when I left here, it was still the case. My family actually lived a little further down the street, where we lived from about 1902, 1903, something like that. We didn't know, of course, that there were Huguenot weavers' lofts or anything else. We had no idea that they were of any great architectural or historic interest or anything else. They were just the places where they lived and they worked. My grandfather had a workshop up at the top of the house, as many of the families did around here. He made hat linings, as it happens, but our next-door neighbor was a furrier on one side of us. On the other side, they did tailor's trimmings. This was a synagogue. It was built in 1862. But I remember it, of course, as a child, we used to come here regularly. I used to come here with my grandfather every Sabbath, every Saturday, and of course on every holiday, every religious holiday, that is. And it really is a very, very curious sensation to be in this building, looking as it does now, because then, of course, obviously there's no scaffolding and the rest of it. I can actually pinpoint the date when I was last here, which was the 26th of August, 1939, a Saturday. The last time when I attended a service in this building, and oddly enough, of all the memories that come back to me, it's reading the inscriptions on the ladies' gallery up there, because it was very boring sitting here for hours, and I remember spending a lot of time reading those inscriptions. I left because on September the 2nd, 1939, I was evacuated with my school, which was quite a traumatic experience in more than one way, because as religious Jews, to leave on the Sabbath was something which would ordinarily have been unheard of. I left then and I never came back. You found that there were Jewish businesses, Jewish shops, workshops, factories and what have you, which carried on here for a very, very long time. Many of them are still here even now, in the East End of London, but the people don't live here anymore. So it started drifting away from here a very, very long time ago. The Bengalis came in the 50s, in the 1950s and 60s, en masse. They were similar to the Jews in that they had a non-Christian culture, a non-Christian religion, and a very strongly family-based culture and religion.
Well, it had been used as a factory for 20 or 30 years, and the apparent condition was quite appalling. But the great good fortune architecturally of these houses is that they came down in the world incredibly fast, so that the Victorians never modernized them or improved them. Literally, when I came here, the only lavatory was out in the garden, where there were rows of them, built specially for the factory. And therefore, behind all the places where people had hammered in nails and things like that, was the original panelling. And in fact, only one wall between the drawing room and the library has needed to be replaced. That, in fact, had been destroyed in a fire.
I think most of the people who want to buy houses and live in Spitalfields do so because they're interested in history, in architecture. Anybody who goes into that church is going to be held by it because it is an expression of grandeur. Interest in the building brought a lot of people to Spitalfields who, impressed with Christ Church, then explored the area around it. They love the houses. There's some sort of emotional response to the buildings.
I find Georgian architecture very exciting because of its mix of broad and good proportions, windows and doors, coupled with fantastically good detailing, window arches, door cases, which together make a fantastic variety. They were built by speculators, very little money, yet they managed to achieve terrific variety of detailing within a very generally rather bland facade.
These houses look as if they were part of the major reconstruction of the city following the fire of London in 1666. They have the deep red brickwork, finely wrought arches, red brick dressings and so on that one associates with the work of Wren. In fact, they weren't built that period. They were built in the mid-1720s. One of the major reasons for its conservative appearance, in fact, the houses were built by builders, master builders, not by architects, not men following fashion. Another major consequence of this being built by builders is that they are built on a shoestring. The builders, to attract a client, a buyer, put all the money he had into the facade. The insides were left very, very empty. The houses were built on 90-year building leases. That is, the builder would get the lease for 90 years, raise the money to build pairs. Virtually all this street is built in pairs. They're built, in fact, by the same pair of builders, Mr. Bunce and Mr. Williams. They started that end and worked up 1725, 26, 27. Now, one of the problems with this, the houses look very fine externally, but because the builders didn't have much cash, they skimped terrifically on the structure. The facades are fine, but if one looks through the buildings doing repairs now, one finds there's no bond between facade and between party walls, soft timbers built into brickwork. In fact, they were built to last 90 years, and it's not that, the result is not as bad as one may think. Most houses haven't collapsed, but occasionally this sort of thing does happen, where one sees the facing bricks have parted from the brick piers behind. The brick piers behind doing all the structural work are built out of rubbishy bricks laid in a most astonishingly eccentric way.
The houses are very economically built. They're very easy to live in. The spaces are where you want them, the kitchens in the basement, dining room on the first floor and ground floor, bedrooms above. That's how the houses were lived in when they were built in the 1720s. It's how one lives in them now.
And the new one, Silent Running. We can see rehearsing there. So we'll see you tomorrow morning, 8:45. Bye-bye. Now, BBC One, Part 1 of Richard Cooper's science fiction thriller, codename Icarus.
It says a lot about a house, that it can go on being in the same sort of use for such a long time. And obviously the chaps who planned got the plan right. It's never been bettered, I think. This house is typical of the majority of houses in Spitalfields. It was built as a shell by Mr. Bunce and Mr. Williams, two builders, and everything you see within here was fitted by the first occupier. This is what gives the house such different character. This house is pretty dental corners. House next door has very little detail. The panelling is all pine, and pine was used invariably after about 1710 when oak got too expensive, and also invariably pine was always painted. The colours vary from year to year, fashions change, but always, always, always painted. There are problems with pine. You see here, this started to crack. It responds to the seasons. In summer it dries out and opens up, in the winter it absorbs moisture and closes and so on. Central heating causes these things much more rapidly. You should never use central heating ever in a panelled house. Interesting to also the hierarchy of the house. An easy way of seeing this hierarchy is the staircase. If you walk up the stairs, you'll see that the lower flights have more decorations than the higher flights, simply because the people who lived here wanted their friends to see the grand parts of the house when they're entertaining down here, and of course they wouldn't go above this level. Four and Six is a remarkable house. It's unlike that other house in Fournier Street. It's very much a show house. It was built by a man called Marmaduke Smith, who was a master builder. He built other things in the area. This is the house he occupied, and obviously saw it as a display of his own talents. The main threat to Spitalfields came from the city. For big property developers looking for office sites, what could be more convenient than these little rundown sites on their very doorstep? The houses were coming down like ninepins. The crunch came in 1977 when British Land Property Company bought up 9 houses in Elder Street, one of the best early Georgian streets in London. They'd already demolished 2 houses when some friends and I set up the Spitalfields Historic Buildings Preservation Trust to try and save those that remained. This house we're sitting in now itself was half demolished and due for demolition. It just seemed crazy to us that on one hand the authorities were making booklets about Spitalfields saying it's a historic area, the buildings were listed. On the other hand, the demolition teams were moving along. Nothing seemed to be happening. One could simply sit back and see the whole area go. So we felt the trust was needed to intervene and to take some much stronger and direct action to save the area. Obviously wasn't, you know, there was no sort of a game for gentlemen, really, any more conservation. So, the Trust, to save these two houses, in particular 5 and 7 Elder Street, as the most threatened ones, the only houses we've been able to identify so far as being purpose-built for weaving. The top floors of both, that's the second and third floors, are obviously built as weaving lofts.
They also had surprisingly rich interiors for their tiny size. I mean, they're amongst the most modest from the exterior of all the houses in Spitalfields.
Absolutely.
And yet they were really delightful inside. And despite the fact that they were full of rubble and the roofs were off, one could still see that.
That was actually the most striking thing when we eventually got in.
We were astonished, weren't we?
Broke in, fact, you know, walked in through the back to inspect the houses out, and, you know, they've been empty for many years. To see the panelling, the quality of panelling, the china cupboards, as good little, you know, the staircase tread surviving, good cornices, and one corner even had gold decoration under many layers, looking about 1800. Obviously, they've been very, very interestingly occupied, you know, weavers, but the ground floor's been quite grand. We moved in to stop any further demolition and told British Land that we were interested in buying the houses in order to repair them and that we were going to pay for this ourselves. Negotiations were going very well until, to our horror, after a week of this, they sent in a demolition team and began to take off the one surviving roof. Unfortunately, they made a technical error, that is, they should have notified the GLC 24 hours before beginning that work that they were going to do it. They hadn't done that. So we got the GLC in, they got the demolition men out on the technicality, and we moved back in. Then for 11 days, just 24-hour squat, at least 2 people here. British Land then started treating us as criminals, saying we were sort of evil people, wouldn't treat with people like us. It was a stalemate, and we broke this in the end by occupying their offices in Portman Square. It worked, in fact. They were very, very shocked, and we refused to leave. We had dozens of eminent men, eminent in the world of architecture, supporting us. And from then, from that occupation, we probably started proper discussions.
We got a lot of really quite favourable publicity, which helped enormously in our negotiations, if that's the word, with the owners, who were going through a very sensitive time following the property crash in 1974, and were trying to refinance their vast property empire in the city. And of course, this constant stream of really quite large headlines in the newspapers to the effect that that same company were busy destroying the built heritage of Spitalfields wasn't doing any good at all. The aim of the Trust was to take a much more direct line than had been taken hitherto in Spitalfields, or anywhere else in London, really. Like all historic buildings trusts, which now proliferate, although not, funny enough, in central London, this one had a special power as a charity to buy and sell property. It really acts, in a way, like a charitable property company, in that it can buy houses with what's called a rolling fund, which builds up out of the profits of sales, and then either restore them itself or sell them on with very strict covenants governing what can be done to them and what has to be done to them, to private owners who'll do the same thing. Part of the point of the Elder Street squat was to try and establish the area as a place where people would want to come and live, because until property values could be brought up in this area to the point where it was more attractive for an existing owner to sell to a residential occupier than to let to a rag trade outfit for workshop use, the houses remained in danger, especially the interiors, which were slowly but surely being destroyed by this really very unsuitable use. 27 Folgate Street is an interesting special case because of the 5 or 6 really outstanding large houses in this area. It was the last to remain in use as a rag trade workshop. We were worried about it because it was in particularly heavy use. It had been subdivided into workshop units. And every now and then we'd find a bit of the splendid staircase or a bit of panelling or something important from the interior outside, either in a skip or in the street. And gradually the interior was just being eaten away, as it were, by this essentially unsuitable use.
This is one of the unfortunate problems of houses that have been used as workshops. Somebody wanted to place a bench along here, and this is a very finely carved piece of chimney piece, and they've just come along and hacked out a section to put a timber through there for a worktop. Now, unfortunately, we've got to have this piece made up.
The important thing was to rehouse the tenants, relocate the tenants, without causing disruption in the community and without prejudicing their businesses. Because I needn't go into why. It's obvious that one can't go about bullying people into leaving these buildings just because one thinks there's a better use. We took over a derelict heavy industry enterprise quite nearby and converted it into purpose-built workshops, really vastly better than anything that's available in the older houses of the area. In East Spitalfields, which is a great centre for the Bengali population of London, there could be a problem if one didn't take tremendous pains to actually prevent discord. Up to now, we've avoided actually purchasing houses in which Bengalis lived in any great concentration because we feel that the houses which are in commercial use are at far greater risk. There is another side to the problem in that there's terrific pressure in the area to actually improve the housing conditions of the existing residents. That's something we've tended to stay out of. Life is short. We're here principally to protect buildings and not people. And we can't really get involved in what we see as a parallel and equally important, but essentially different issue.
I don't know how on earth anyone can talk about conservation at a time when you've got such a large number of people living in very serious overcrowding conditions. Single people actually occupying 8-9 bedroom houses when you're talking about 6-7 people actually living in rooms. So conservation is something that shouldn't come into the question of it in areas like this. I think we have enough conservation in other areas. What we need is in this area is more housings. And what is important is that the people actually holding on large houses down in Folgate Street and Precursor Street should release those housing to local people. We had arguments why people actually want to stay so closely in a very overcrowded area. Why don't they move out? And their reasons have been the local amenities, the shops, mosques, and the community in which they have been growing up for the last few years. Their children have settled in the area. There are local mosques, there are local Bengali classes around. Above all, one of the main reasons why people actually want to stay in this area is their employment. Most of the people actually work below their living accommodation. But I think it's also an area that a lot of people actually feel safe for a number of reasons. One is racial harassment, which there is very little in this area. Management committee meeting the minute amra 3 number rakhi dumu ki mara rising. Spitalfield Housing Cooperative was initially started by a group of people who saw the importance and the necessary for Bengali people to start taking collective action about the housing problems in this area. The kind of properties we actually bought initially were basically slums. The houses are grossly overcrowded. In each house, there are 3 or 4 times as many people as there should be. So for every unit that we buy, we need at least 3 additional units to actually rehouse those people adequately.
You see the problem in this space. It's terrible mess, and this door is broken. This pipe is, the water is coming through the pipe, and my goods are damaged in the other room.
I'll try and get a builder down here sometime next week, but we won't be able to do anything until we've raised the money, and the housing co-op are also doing the building works upstairs, because then what will happen is we'll have to move everybody out. And then we'll get the building and all the works will be done, and then you have the option of coming back here or maybe moving into one of the other.
We have been quite successful in acquiring 1 or 2 empty sites, some empty properties, which we have been able to allocate to some of the people who are in most urgent need. Our main problem is actually acquiring reasonable sized properties to rehouse people within the streets they want to be. Some of it has been caused by the conservationists who have bought 8-10 bedroom houses for single people.
We're not opposed to subdivision into flats of the existing houses on any moral or human grounds. We'd rather that public housing was built or subsidised housing was built on new sites or in less sensitive buildings, simply because the early houses of Spitalfields are so rare, so tightly planned, and use so much wood in their construction that to rearrange them internally to make usable flats with proper means of escape and to satisfy all the local authority requirements is essentially to destroy them. The houses were very simply built. They were all built by speculative builders using extremely simple, rather labour-intensive methods. And it's always seemed to us that the best way to repair them would be simply by trying to recreate a team of craftsmen who could apply those same methods to the buildings in the same way and just put back what's missing.
This staircase originally would have gone straight down, and it's been turned to accommodate the hospital that was here 150 years ago, up until the late 1940s. And it was a very splendid staircase, in as much that each tread had 3 barley twist balustrades on, and each tread had its own corbel. And houses with not such a grand staircase often don't have any corbels at all, and usually only 2 balustrades, which are usually quite plain rather than barley twist. And we're now going to hopefully put it back to as it was originally. It can be very much like a not too complicated jigsaw puzzle, really. I mean, the pieces are there looking at you, and it's just a matter of piecing some more around them. And obviously, you've got to have the money to do the work. I mean, it's expensive work. The main thing is to get the structure in the roof. Keep the elements out. If you can get the windows back in, get the lid back on the top, all the tiles and the roof and the lead work. And then once you get the elements out of the building, then you can actually start repairing the interior facade sort of thing. When they were built, there were never no bathrooms. So it usually means you've got to sacrifice a very large bedroom in a house of this size, because we can't alter the size of it because they're listed buildings. And you have what used to be a bedroom now turned into a bathroom, which can be of 2-3 times the size of an average bathroom today.
Of course, one result of this process of raising values has been that we've tended to be accused of gentrifying Spitalfields. You've only got to look around at the people who live here. They put up with a great deal. They put up with a great deal of mess from the market, from appalling noise in the mornings, rats, everything you can think of. It's not by any means a select part of London in which to live. It's simply an area in which people can indulge their enthusiasm for buildings relatively peaceably. But the problem of gentrification is one that anyone in our position faces.
This was the cheapest house in England, as far as I could make out. £6,000. Derelict building, and it was just too tempting. I mean, everybody told me not to touch it. I'm variously told it had been a doss house for 7 years, and somebody else I met in the street, some old guy, told me it had been a brothel. It was pretty disgusting, frankly. Didn't worry me terribly, because I really like a challenge, and the more disgusting it looks, the more I can imagine changing it.
The great thing about the Spitalfields houses is that they're not stereotyped, nor are the people who live in them. Very wide variety of people, and very exciting variety of people.
It's been wonderful watching people who haven't, like myself, got very much money to work with. Real craftsmen and so on, be able to get the houses which that I think they deserve. We all sort of safeguard what Spitalfields has. One thing none of us want is a house or an environment that can be bought at a department store. Spitalfields were completely free of any of those forces that make us to conform to that sort of thing. Our liberty, our freedom was all important here. The houses are not palatial, they're not grand, they're real, they're middle-class family houses, townhouses. And If you surrender to them, if you don't try to make them into a G-plan special, if you just surrender to them, then I think you'll find that they do dictate to you a very interesting style of life. I like the way things are going in Spitalfields, and I think that one day people will thank us for what we've done. I like to think so anyway, in our motto, the joke seems to always be that some people quite like Joan Collins restorations, but we prefer the Queen Mother. None of us moved here to change it, to gentrify it, so to speak, so the word is sometimes used. We moved here because we like it here, and we like what it is. The market, the brewery, all those things are Spitalfields. To make it into Miami Beach has never been my aspiration. You can go to North London and find North London, West London and find West London. It's getting more and more difficult to find East London.
Come on, I'm going home now. I've got a few left. Who wants them a pound? Pound a piece. You like it? Come on, there's some.
Good morning.
Very nice.
Suit?
Wonderful. Really £5.
£5.
Good.
That's really good.
Oh, lovely.
That one's really deep.
Wonderful cake. I was thinking about these buildings here. Well, any moment they could be demolished.
No, really?
Yeah, there's permission being given. I mean, the GLC slum clearance.
God, that's such a pity.
And that will mean the end of the market, really, won't it?
It is,
I mean, all to be cleared away.
If only they'd realize, actually, that it's not just a buying and selling thing. How many people, look around, are here to buy something? Just close your eyes and listen to it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's quite amazing. It's the East End. It's all that's left of it.